good morning, everyone. Welcome to Church of the Holy Communion for what is a really very special Sunday morning for us. We are just so privileged to have with us Bishop Don Johnson and Mrs. Jeannie Johnson for their very last parochial visitation as during his service as the third Bishop of West Tennessee. Bishop, Mrs. Johnson, welcome home to Holy Communion. As you all know, we have a bishop-elect who will be consecrated as the fourth Bishop of West Tennessee next Saturday at Hope Church at 11 o'clock, and we should all be there. And then our seminarian, Sarah Cowan, will be lecturing in the Rector's Forum next Sunday morning, so please make sure to be here next Sunday. We have invited Jane Roberts, Minister of Communication at Church of the Holy Communion, to interview the Johnsons for us this morning, and there will be some time for questions from the congregation at the end. But we begin with a prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we give you thanks for raising up leaders for your church, leaders of vision and compassion and boldness. We give you thanks for the ministry of Don Johnson, for the ministry of Jeannie Johnson, and for the upcoming ministry of Phoebe Rofe. Come and be with us as we remember all that is past and look ahead to the future that you have given us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Bishop Johnson and Jeannie, we are so thrilled to have you here on the last Sunday of your 43 years in ministry. Before we talk about all the things that have happened in our lives and your lives, and in the society in all that time. Don, will you start out by telling us what I think is an important story in your ministry about a man you met on the streets of Chicago? And I think you were ordained, but I'm not sure. So tell us that story.
Jane came by our house, and we had a chance to spend a wonderful evening together, just kind of kicking around some ideas and sharing stories. And one that kind of captured her imagination was something that happened to me when I was in seminary. And Jeannie and I met when we were in Chicago. Chicago was home for her. I was in seminary in Evanston. And along the way, and actually it was just before Jeannie and I met, I had started a field education work, which seminarians do, and they're assigned to a parish. And I felt really pretty good about myself. I was officially able to wear a clergy uniform, except they had a little racing stripe made of electrical tape, so in case anybody really wanted to make sure if you were really ordained or not. And I was not, but I was in this education experience in a parish. And I took anybody that knows Chicago, the elevated train into Belmont exit, and I'm feeling really good about myself, okay? And I'm walking from the elevated train about 2 blocks over to St. Peter's Episcopal Church. And Father Dunkerley was the rector at the church, and I was looking forward to working with him. Brilliant guy, and I knew I had a lot I could learn from him. And I'm feeling really good about myself. So I'm walking over that way, and I walk past a park. And in the park, there's a guy sitting next to the sidewalk, and I come by feeling really good about myself and all this gear, and he sees me, and he spit on me. And I thought, number one, I was shocked. But number two, I began thinking about that because it was obvious, not accidental. He did it on purpose. And I could tell there was some experience he had had with what all that stuff represented that I didn't want to be associated with. I wanted to either change the way people thought about what does it mean to be a servant of the servants of God, which we all are. We all share the priesthood of all believers. But what does it mean to be seen as a Christian in community and have people respond to you in such a way that it's not that negative, visceral reaction? And that's just always kind of been in the back of my mind. So Jean told me to keep my answers short. Okay, I will. and I always do what Jean tells me to eventually.
Well, Bishop, when we see you, you usually are very resplendent in red, and and looking very well coiffed. And I want people just to know some things about you that go behind the scenes. First of all, will you tell the people how many miles a year you drive within the confines of this diocese?
There are others who can brag more on that than I, but it's probably 28 to 30,000 miles in the diocese a year. And if I go outside the diocese, the reason I know the specific numbers is when I go outside the diocese, I just rent a car rather than put the extra miles on mine. So it's, over 30,000 a year.
And how many times a year do you preach?
Essentially every Sunday. If Jeannie and I are taking vacation and I'm gone on a Sunday, I don't preach then. But what's interesting is being in a different place every Sunday. As a parish priest, you get the community. And after 18 years of bishing in this diocese, I feel pretty comfortable about going from place to place. But it is different than having one community that you know the people and get to share life with them in a different way.
I know from our conversation that night that the bishop wasn't exactly pleased that you were going to marry before you had finished seminary. So, will you tell us?
There have been a number of times bishops haven't been pleased with me, but that's a different story.
Will you tell us that story, and will you also tell us why it was the right decision?
You want me to tell it, or you want Jeannie? Okay. When, again, in Chicago, Jeannie and I had been dating 9 months, and we figured that was more than enough time, and so we decided to get married, But in order to do that, I told her, and Jean's a lifelong Episcopalian. Okay, I'm a convert. I'm one of those old Baptists that saw the light. Okay, so I said I've got to call the bishop. And Jean was kind of startled by that because she didn't think that was necessary. This was about our lives, So I called Bishop Van Dross. Some of you may recall Jack Van Dross. And we drove to Nashville, which is where his office was in 100 Oaks Shopping Center. And we went up to his office, and Bishop Van Dross was diminutive in stature, but bigger than life. And so we walk in, and as soon as we get into the lobby in the bishop's office, his receptionist announces we're there, and all I hear from his office is, "Johnson, get in here." "Yes, sir, coming." So we go in there, and I'm going to introduce Jeannie, and he knows the purpose of the meeting. But after he met Jeannie, he never said another word to me. He just fell in love with Jean, and so finally we're able to get out of there, and with his blessing on our plans to get married, and I think it's worked out pretty well for me. I don't know about Jean. I will not speak for her on that, but yeah, we've been married almost be 44 years, May the 31st, and well. And so far, so good. She's been patient.
So after that, you returned to your home in Tennessee to take on the mantle of ministering to the people. First in Chattanooga, then you arrived at Calvary, Memphis, as a priest associate.
I came expecting to be the priest associate, yes.
What happened? What happened?
Bishop Sanders was the bishop at the time, and he sent me directly out of a year's after seminary. He sent me to Calvary, and so Jeannie and I pack up, and we're heading across from Chattanooga, and then it rattles around the back of my mind what Bishop Sanders actually said. I heard him say, "Go to Calvary," and that was fine. I was thrilled, So we're packed up and going. But then I remembered that wasn't the end of the sentence. The full sentence was, "I want you to go to Calvary in case something happens to the rector." That was the whole sentence. So, and the rector there, his wife had died recently. There was a lot of stress in his life, and so he ended up transferring out and went to become the dean of the cathedral in Houston. where Barclay Thompson is now, from one of our own from here. And so Jeannie and I show up, I was ordained a priest 6 weeks, and then we were at Calvary for 6 weeks, and then I was the priest in charge at Calvary for a year and a half till they called Doug Bailey, which will tell you how long ago that was. So we've had I had no clue what to do. Ms. Eggleston was the secretary, and I'd say, Ms. Eggs, what do I do next? And she'd tell me to go to the hospital or do that. I just did what she told me to do. We made it through. It was great.
And then after that, for the next 23 years, you served as rector, first at Christ Church in Chattanooga, then St. John's in Johnson City, then Church of the Resurrection in Williamson County. I think we owe those parishes something for the leader you became. I know you learned a lot. What are the few things you can tell us?
One of the things I learned, and it's been reiterated as bishop, is each faith community has its own personality. And you all have made a choice to be here. You didn't have to be here. You've made a choice to be here. You've chosen well. And so the personalities of churches, the things, the values that are shared. I mean, for example, I'm really proud of what y'all have done in this capital campaign. It's not about the money, it's about the vision. But the money and the support and the working with the school and the working on this project that goes beyond sort of the old ways of thinking, you should be proud of that. Bishop Sanders did tell me you're not supposed to have pride, but a little holy satisfaction's okay. So you should have some holy satisfaction about what you've accomplished here. I think it's great, But each church has taught me something different, and I think in no situation where I've had the opportunity to serve have I ever thought that it was going to bring in the kingdom, but I've always felt like there was some contribution that I was supposed to make. And so Jeannie and I would go and bring our lives and our experience and our gifts to bear as best we could, and then we'd move on to something else. And I think I see no reason to believe that moving out of this particular ministry and into something yet to be revealed will not be the same way. We've tried to make contributions, and it's been a blessing.
I have a story I want to share. Our first parish in Chattanooga was Christ Church, and it was a tiny little Anglo-Catholic parish. And there were 14 people in the pews the first Sunday we were there, so it was really little. And they had 2 very high church celibate priests there before Don and I got there. Well, of course, they didn't know what to do with me, and our daughter Laura was on my hip, and they had no idea what to do with a baby in that parish. And so I made the mistake one Sunday of walking into the sacristy. And in an Anglo-Catholic parish, no one's supposed to do that except for the priest and the altar guild. They're very strict. I didn't know that. I grew up in Chicago, and that's an Anglo-Catholic diocese, but I grew up in a church called St. Mark's, and it was so low they called it Mr. Mark's. So I didn't quite know what to do. So I walked into to the sacristy, and I had Laura on my hip and a diaper bag over my arm. And I looked at Don. He was signing the book for the attendance book. And I said, honey, would you get me a cup of coffee? And the altar guild ladies had a fit, and they literally did like this to me and put me in the corner of the sacristy. And they said, oh, no, you must call him Father here like we do. And so since I grew up in the Episcopal Church, I didn't take all that very seriously. And so I said, okay, and I looked at him and I said, Father, honey, would you get me a cup of coffee? And for the rest of the 8 years we were there, all the altar guild ladies called him Father Honey.
It doesn't seem exactly appropriate with an endearing title like that when you became our bishop, you moved into a double-wide trailer. Man, what happened?
some of you will recall that there was a fire at the cathedral, and it happened just before we came over here. And when I arrived, there was this double-wide trailer out in the parking lot that was to become our offices. And I thought, how nice. I just moved here from East Tennessee. They've set this up so I'll feel at home, you know? And we were in the double-wide for quite a while and eventually got back. It's not unlike your wandering in the wilderness here, having to be somewhat peripatetic in your willingness to be flexible and accomplish what you need to. So, but that's what happened. We ended up starting there and then moved into Diocesan House within the year.
2 years later then, in 2003, Jean Robinson, an openly gay priest, was elected to the House of Bishops. And everything about politics in this body of faith became different. What happened in this diocese?
People of good faith in this diocese were all over the board in terms of where they understood the implications of decisions that the Episcopal Church had made at that time. I was what I would call more on the traditional end of the spectrum, which at that point meant that I did not vote in favor of Jean Robinson. There were some folks that were very adamantly opposed to that decision on my part, but I think we found a way to stay together, and really that's what I was looking for, because it was clear that society and that the culture and that the church, the Episcopal Church, was moving in the direction that we ended up moving anyway at General Convention. But I felt that as a bishop for all the people in the diocese, I needed to, I guess it's a leadership style, if you could call it that, of sort of stand in the middle and lean. I tried to just sort of stand and stay connected to people. And so it was not always an easy place to be, but I thought it was a faithful place to be, because quite honestly, I knew that I didn't know everything on all these topics. I mean, I just knew that. And I knew that it was a changing world and that I needed to kind of hang in there and try to understand what the changes were. And I also made a vow, and those of us who are ordained all make this vow in one form or another, but that I will uphold the doctrine and discipline of Christ as this church has received them. And this church means the Episcopal Church. As this branch of the Jesus movement, this branch of Christendom, is shaped in a particular way. And because of that, part of my ministry as bishop has been to try to faithfully execute that commitment that I made. So it meant that I needed to listen to people in very different places on a wide spectrum. And so I could stand in the middle of that. With regard to the actual vote itself at General Convention, though I did not vote for Jean Robinson at the time, over time he and I became pretty good buddies. And the day of the election, I met him in a lobby in the hotel where the convention was taking place, and I told him, I said, Jean, I did not vote for you, but I'll find a way for us to work together. And I was very blessed at Lambeth Conference in 2008 when Jean asked me to go and speak on his behalf at the Lambeth Conference to explain how our relationship had developed and changed over time, because I had changed over time. And and ultimately became a supporter and stand behind the church's decision. But at the time, I was kind of a work in progress, and I hope still am something of a work in progress. And I believe that's a lifelong faith stance to take, is we kind of stand in the midst of things and try to understand what God's saying today. Sorry, I've gone to preaching.
It wasn't but a few years later that Catherine Jeffords Shorey was named the presiding bishop, and things got difficult again. Some dioceses said that they refused to be governed by a female presiding bishop. And Bishop, we know that the Archbishop of Canterbury set up a committee and asked you to serve, one of 8 people on that committee, to work with the dioceses around the nation who were not comfortable with this. Can you tell us what came of that work and how it felt to be one of 8 people on that committee?
That is still a work in progress, to be honest, and some of it has to do with male, female, and those who take a strong stand around a male priesthood. So, much less episcopacy. I would say I did vote for Catherine Jefferts Shorey, and Catherine and I have, except for the time that she was serving as presiding bishop, she and I were in a study group together, and I have always admired her. She's brilliant, and so for me, it was not a hard decision, but I do remember this dynamic, and this is something about a way to make a choice that I decided was important. I knew all the people who were standing for election as presiding bishop at the time, who had been nominated as presiding bishop, and I liked all of them, and they all had good qualities. But I decided that the vote for Catherine Jefferts Shorey was a vote for the future, not for the past. And that was sufficient for me because I knew she was up to the task, and the others could have done a fine job. But Catherine's, not because she was a woman, but she just had the qualities for the future that the church needed. Now, Jean has a different story and a different take on that from the General Convention and her experience of walking in. I might
Jeannie,
get her, because I think it's...
What's your story?
Well, I was with the what we call the House of Spouse. So that's the bishop's spouses. They have the House of Bishops and the House of Spouse. And so we had a special room set up at General Convention where we could all gather and, meet and greet each other and keep in touch and have speakers and all. Anyway, we were up there and had heard that there had been an election for presiding bishop. So we all left that room and went into the big House of Deputies, which is really huge. What, 2,500, Father Sandy? Is it about 20?
There are 850 voting members plus everybody else.
Plus everybody else. So it's a huge room. It must be probably, I guess, 8 times the size of this parish hall. It was huge. And so we were all, the bishop spouses, all standing in the back, waiting for the announcement. And when the announcement came and someone said, the bishops have just elected Catherine Jefferts Shorey, there was this huge shout that went up in the room. And I looked around, and for the first time, I saw women in a different way than I ever had before in my church. It was quite a moment. It really was. It really was. I knew women were, allowed to be on vestry now and all these other things, and ordained and all of that, but it was different when she was elected presiding bishop for the entire church. It was an affirmation of who I was and who I am. So that was an important moment for me.
I want to tell you that I talked to a former bishop, Dorsey Henderson, who was bishop of the Upper South Carolina Diocese. He knows the Johnsons very well. And he said that being named to that committee at that point in Bishop Johnson's tenure as a bishop was really quite illuminating. Here's what he said. He was already considered a mover and a shaker, one who could work out a deal that would be acceptable to a presiding bishop and the dioceses that refused to recognize her leadership. Don was respected enough that both sides would work with him. And that's from Dorsey Henderson.
It reminds me of a statement of a former rector of Church of the Holy Communion. Some of you may have heard of Reynolds Jeannie. And he liked the phrase because he was on the State of the Church, which is a major committee at General Convention, and they put together a statement out of every General Convention to sort of do an assessment of where the church is and where it's going. And Reynolds' favorite phrase from that, which I'm sure he must have come up with because he liked to tell the story, is we're in the cutting middle. And I think that was true to that situation. It has been fascinating to see how different themes or issues have captured or kidnapped the attention of the church. But I think that I've always been one that if having grown up within a different tradition, and I deeply appreciate my Southern Baptist background. My mother retired 5 times from the Tennessee Baptist Convention. Every time she'd retire, they'd hire her back at more money. I think it was her game plan. I don't know what it was. But having said that, I would also say I was brought up in a more of a rules and regulations kind of mindset, to put it mildly. And when I became an Episcopalian, one of the things that drew me into the Episcopal Church was if there's a default that as an Episcopal Christian, I might have a default, it would be to choose on the side of God's mercy and God's love. And it's not that you can't say no to somebody as a way of loving. You know, I mean, that's anybody that has children understands that, or has friends understands that. But that's part of the beauty for me of what we share as Episcopalians. Is we have a faith community that says that our default should be to God's love and mercy and care. Okay. All the other things, you know, all the beauty of the facilities and all are here for the sake of enhancing that way of being. Okay? So I did go. I went with this group to meet with Archbishop Rowan Williams, and it was there were some who stayed in relationship with him in different ways over longer periods of time. But it was my first time to meet with him and to be part of a group, and we just had conversations and tried to hear one another's point of view, and provide space for that. It's what Father Eric Law called create a grace margin, create a space where people could explore things from different perspectives, and not stop listening before you could hear one another, and that was the challenge.
That same former bishop, when I asked him about Jeannie, said, well, he knew Jeannie quite well because they had shared some martinis together, but he didn't really know so much about her work, and the reason he didn't know much about her work, he said, was because she was not one of the wives who sat in the gallery. She was usually gone. So, Jeannie, will you tell us why you were gone and what work you were doing when you were in absentia?
This would have been at General Convention.
Right,
There's a gallery for all the visitors to be able to see what the House of Bishops is doing. And for the most part, anyone can go and sit there. But a lot of the bishop's spouses, and now actually we have some male spouses, so they're not all wives, but the spouses oftentimes would go and sit and listen to the proceedings that were going on, and sometimes they'd take their knitting or whatever, and they would listen and then be able to talk about that with their bishop spouse. That was not really ever something that I found to be my business, right? That what I was doing was that there were a group of spouses, bishop spouses, and I was honored to be able to serve on the bishop spouses planning group. So we worked at planning things for the spouses to do when we went to General Convention and retreats for ourselves and things like that we did. But there were always mission projects. And so we'd go to an inner city church and we'd work with people there, or we'd fix lunch for them. One time when we were in Orange County, we went to a very poor neighborhood and cleaned everybody's gardens in that particular block for them and painted their house. So those were the kind of things that I found to be more interesting for me and more helpful. I think, I'm more of a doer kind of a Christian.
Speaking of being a doer, will you tell us about the letter you got from Presiding Bishop Michael Curry, and you were sure it was for your husband?
Yeah, this has been several years ago, right after Presiding Bishop Michael Curry was elected. That following spring, the House of Bishops always has a spring retreat. And it's either at Cayuga or it's at Camp Allen in Texas. And I was actually in the middle of a Kaleidoscope Institute conference that I was helping to lead, and I got an email from one of Michael Curry's assistants. And it was an invitation for me to preach at the House of Bishops. And I thought, oh, surely they've gotten the email addresses wrong. This is for Don, because that doesn't make any sense to me at all. So I forwarded it to Don, and he got back in touch with the office, and they said, no, this really was for Jeannie. Michael Curry.
They had heard me preach.
And so what Michael was trying to do, I think, was to shake things up a little bit and to not have the same kind of things that had happened in the past in some of those meetings. And so his idea was to have me preach one day at the House of Bishops meeting in Texas, and that was the same day Don would celebrate the Eucharist. So I was at one end of the room, and he was at the other end. And he was at the altar end, and I was at the other end at the lectern. And it was the most honored and the most terrified I have ever been. And I am very grateful to Archdeacon Mimsy, because she's a wonderful preacher. And after I had worked on my sermon for the House of Bishops, I called and asked if she would listen to it for me, because I needed to get her advice. And she was very helpful. She really was. But I'm very grateful for her. And it was quite an experience. I think that I was the only person who's not been ordained. Is that right? That was allowed to preach at the House of Bishops meeting. And that's quite an honor. So
I wish we could have been there. And now, EFM, Jeannie, you are known so well among the Episcopal Church for your work in the EFM ministry. Will you tell us how long you've been doing it? Give us a short synopsis of what EFM is, and tell us how it has shaped you.
Do you all know EFM, Education for Ministry? Anybody know? It's basically a 4-year seminary-type program for lay people, so that if you want to take your faith deeper, EFM is a great way to do that. The first year is Old Testament, the second year is New Testament, the third year is church history, and the fourth year is contemporary theology. And then that's all tied up with something that we call theological reflection. And that's where we take what we learn from the scriptures and church history and theology and apply it to our own lives. So it was very life-changing for me. And I've done this work now almost 30 years. So it's a long time. I've been a trainer, which means that there are 50 of us in the whole country, and I go around to all different places in the country and teach people how to be mentors for groups in their own church. And they have to be re-accredited every 18 months. All mentors have to be re-accredited and take continuing education every 18 months. And your clergy don't. But the lay people, we do. Something to think about. But it really was. The reason I took EFM is because I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and I knew all about the liturgical seasons and the colors and, who wore white when. But I had no idea what was really in the Bible. And I married a Southern Baptist who he won all the sword drills. He knew exactly where things were in the Bible. So I wanted to be at least somewhat biblically literate. And that was why I took EFM in the first place. And that was in Johnson City a long time ago. My favorite story about that was when I was taking EFM, the first time we all gathered in our group, and the mentor said, well, let's go around the room and you all tell me why you wanted to take EFM. What are you hoping to get? And several people were like me. They wanted to learn more about the Bible and more about church history. But one of the ladies in the group was in her 80s, in her mid-80s. And she was the last one to answer the question. And she looked at us over her half glasses and she said, well, I don't know about you young people, but I'm cramming for my finals. I love that story.
Jeannie has a class that meets at Holy Communion, an EFM class. She is the mentor. It meets from 6 until 9 on Tuesday nights. The people who are members of the class, I would dare say, spend a whole another 3 hours a week studying for the class. I'm a member of the class. We always have dinner together. That's Jeannie's touch. I will always know that that's Jeannie's touch. And when we sit around the table and talk about, we talk about our lives. We don't really talk about our reading for that week. And when you talk about your lives every week with people, something very magical happens that helps you be able to hear people and be available for people. And after we've talked about that, we talk about our prayer concerns. And it's a powerful thing to, over the course of 4 years, see the ebb and flow in people's lives as the people that they prayed for got better or the situation resolved. Jeannie is also masterful at building a rapport with all kinds of people. There's usually 12 members in the class. When 12 people come together and you're working toward building a unity of one among 12 people, you have to be masterful at helping people feel that they are contributing, that what they say really matters for the whole group. I don't know anybody who does it better, Jeannie. So I just want to say, in the 30 years that you've been doing this, can you give us an estimate of how many people you've mentored in that time?
That's hard to that's hard to say. Mentoring and training together, I would say several hundred over the course of the 30 years. Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about another topic now. Let's talk about diversity in our diocese. It's true that the Episcopal Church in West Tennessee is now ordaining more women than men. I know this is true because Chip Davis told me it's true, and he's someplace in this room. It's so. So that will gradually change what church looks like for many people. We also know that under your tenure as bishop, we now have women in very high places in committees where you have appointed them. The Finance Committee, Commission on Ministry Committee. Will you tell us what you're thinking? And then I have a little bit harder question after that.
I'll go back in time because it's sort of a pattern that has emerged. When I was at St. John's, when Jeannie and I were at St. John's in Johnson City, they had a children's chapel. And the children's chapel was built to look a bit like the high altar area within the main church, which made sense. But at the time, it looked like an opportunity for me, so I took the altar that was against the wall and pulled the altar out. And the Sunday school classes that were taught in there and the children's chapels that were led in there by the women who were the children's teachers typically, I said, I want you to stand behind the altar when you begin your children's chapels and any other opportunities you can to teach. be behind the altar. My idea was that children, the younger you begin to work with children and they begin to model in their own minds, they don't make the distinctions between male, female priest if they can see a woman standing behind the altar over time. It becomes more normative to them. I think that's what's happened in these other examples of changes in the diocese in a similar way. And the other side of it is the women are just smarter. What can you say? I was, thank you. But they're just incredibly capable people, and whether they're St. Mary's graduates or graduates from anywhere else around, I mean, we are really blessed to have just good people and men and women that know a lot of stuff. So I try to just put good people in positions of leadership, and just so happens a lot of them are women. So.
We watched with sadness this winter as St. Elizabeth's closed. If more parishes close, and by some estimates the likelihood is good, what do you want people to know? What should we know?
Well, there are a number of folks who are here today that I see that were parishioners at St. Elizabeth's, and they have their own story they could tell about that. So I would say that the St. Elizabeth's situation was made more difficult by the fact that there were some hopes to be able to fund a project, and the resources proved to not be there. And so a lot of it was really kind of financially driven. And so that, I think, again, that is one of the things that I see here that's been very carefully considered, both under the leadership of your clergy and your rector in particular, and the vestry. There's a business side to the church that if you don't get it right, it can go really wrong. And in seminary, they don't teach much about business. So when you get on the vestry, part of the gift you bring is what you do all week long. Now, it can be a sanctified kind of way to do that in terms of use the gifts that God has given you, but within the context of the church. But that's one of those places where it's very important for church leaders, lay and clergy leadership, to make sure that they can count the facts and figures in a way that doesn't leave the church kind of hanging. St. Elizabeth's, one of the great strengths of St. Elizabeth's, and this is just going to give you another side to this story, and then I'll stop on it. One of the great strengths of St. Elizabeth's over the 18 years that Jeannie and I have been here, is it was a place known for its hospitality. Very warm and welcoming people, great folks, good people. And when they moved into the new location, I think that chances would have been improved if they had had a parish hall that was large enough to grow and use their gift of hospitality. Instead, they moved to building a worship space first, and I think it actually undermined their growth. And so these are simple. This is a really simplified version, but I'd just say that recognize your strengths as well, and hospitality is a major part of growing a church. Our church in Resurrection in Franklin, Tennessee, we worshiped in the parish hall for most of the 5 years that Jeannie and I were there before we were elected to come over and be with you. But toward the end of that, we built a worship space. But we built the worship space because the capacity of the community had been built in the parish hall. I mean, what we did when we gather in situations like this is where we became church. Then we finally got a place we could worship that was a dedicated space. Okay? But what you're doing when you gather outside the worship space is at least as important as when you gather at the altar together. It requires both, and please don't go on record saying I'm against worship. Okay? But the worship is friend of mine who was at Resurrection at the time started the Vergers Guild for the United States. And he reminded me one time, he said, when you gather for worship and you're sitting in the nave of the church and you're sitting out there and you're looking at everything happening at the altar, people in the nave a lot of times forget that they think that there's a play going on up front that they're watching. Whereas in reality, it's God watching us to see what we do when we gather. Reverse the focus of things. What is God seeing us do and be as the people of God? That's where the action is. That's what it means to church, if you will, to be the church. So, okay. But St. Elizabeth's, great people, love them, and I hope they know that. But we had to walk a tough walk, and and thank you. By the way, I want to thank not just Holy Communion, but Holy Communion took a real intentional leadership role in this. They reached out, Sandy in particular, reached out to people, and he and I had talked about it, reached out to people from St. Elizabeth's and made a welcome to them, and you've enfolded them, from what I can tell, pretty well already. So anyway, thank you.
I have one more question, so get yours ready. The last question for me is about the St. Columba Conference and Retreat Center. Church camps, even some run by this denomination, aren't doing as well as they used to do. And some parishes and dioceses have had to close their church camps. St. Columba is led by a board of directors appointed by you. What are you proudest of? And on the day that they are going to break ground on a big new development named for the Johnsons, what still needs more help?
We are blessed in the diocese, and it, how often I think of the number of times that people in the past have made commitments or given gifts or thought ahead out of their own estate and say, what are the things that I have that could be used by God in ways that people have not thought about? It's the old thing about the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. So 20 years or plus ago, somebody made a decision, the Scheiblers, and it's more than 20 years, the Scheibler family made a decision to give property to the diocese that eventually was developed into St. Columba. And of course you have Brad Thompson back in the back there can cite chapter and verse on all this, but in broad brush terms, because of that gift back then, we're in a position today to have a conference center that not every diocese can sustain, but we have. And it's sustainable now because over the period of time, more than 18 years, but certainly in the 18 years, that the leadership there of the board has changed radically. And it started out as kind of a mom and pop organization, lovely people and wonderfully committed to trying to make St. Columba available to everyone. But over time, we began to build a board that became a more program board, and then beyond that, the next iteration of the board became more and more of a support for the work of the director, but also giving some direction to the director. And then after that, we've moved now to a board that is much more of a, for lack of a better way of saying it, a professionally inclined group of people who understand what it takes to accomplish a ministry that is a challenge. I mean, it's always hard work to get funding for certainly beyond just maintenance. Okay? And with Brad Thompson as our director and this incredible board that we have, many of members from Holy Communion over time, and now in particular, and this capital campaign, which we're thrilled to be able to celebrate because of the generosity of all of you and others like you across the diocese. it's that planting for tomorrow that you've made possible, because it's just very hard to keep up. You have to look ahead, and that's what Brad does really well. He has a plan, and he has a group that supports him in accomplishing that plan, and so it's a special place. St. Clement is just a special place, and not every diocese not only cannot afford it, they just don't have the vision, and I think it's the people with the vision that have made that happen. So I'm thankful for them.
And now we're ready for some questions from the floor. So we'll just recognize you, my dear Helen. I'm going to just rephrase it, so it gets recorded. So the question is about reinstating the adult portion of happening Crescio and the importance it played in people's lives.
Jeannie and I were very involved in Crescio when we were in East Tennessee and were on leadership teams with that. And that is going to be a decision that Bishop Rolfe will have to make, quite honestly. So is there a chance? Yes, but obviously it's not going to happen in the next 7 days. So, but it is a wonderful general exposure to give people. I think anytime you can give people language to better articulate their faith, and Crescio does that it's well worth supporting. We have focused more on the happening piece of it for the teenagers. Because they're the ones that I just felt like that's where we needed to focus our energy, and Bishop-elect Rolfe may want to jump into that, but I'm glad you recorded it publicly. I think it's worth saying again. It is good stuff, to use technical language, and as I said, Jeannie and I were very much part of it when we were in East Tennessee. So.
Morgan, Timothy. The question is, for a man who grew up Baptist, what prompted you to become an Episcopalian?
When I was in the Navy, I had a fellow, and he and I just began to talk about God. I had been very involved in the Baptist church all the way up through my freshman year in college. My sophomore year in college, I majored in fraternity, and I left college just before they asked me to leave, and went in the Navy. And while I had sort of fallen away from actively involvement in the Baptist church, at that point I was a member of First Baptist Dallas, Texas, which at that point was the largest Baptist church. Okay? W. Amos Criswell was the pastor, and so I was in the Navy, and he and I would begin to talk, and quite honestly, it was as an Episcopalian from Washington D.C. Tom Winery is the one who as an Episcopalian was an evangelist to me. I want you to hear that, please. I was an Episcopalian, evangelized this Baptist. And he began talking about just some of the differences. Or to put it more positively, he began to talk about how he saw things, and I saw that as different than the way I saw things. And the way he described the differences, it drew me in more and more. First service in the Episcopal Church I ever attended was at St. Mark's in Jacksonville, Florida. And it was on a Christmas Eve, and I'd never been to a liturgically oriented Christmas Eve service before. And I walked in, it just felt like home. It just like I was in the right place. So that's not very exotic, but that's what happened. It was a visceral sense of being in the right place. I could say a lot more, but I won't.
Eleanor, what did you expect life to be as a bishop, and what turned out to be different?
I can't remember what I said. So it's one of the things about moving into retirement. The thing I miss about being a parish priest was it was most of what I did was one-to-one. As a bishop, most of what I do is one-to-group. And that's obviously overstated, but I miss that kind of intimacy of knowing a community in depth. And so that was a change. The other thing was I expected to be all over the diocese. And that's why 28 to 30,000 miles in the diocese is not, between the rivers, that's where I'm on the road all the time. I did not expect to travel as much outside the diocese for the church. That's been different. It's been a privilege and been a real honor, but it's also been a great surprise. I mean, I've traveled around the world as bishop in ways I probably never would have gone to see the places I've been and done the things I've done. And Jeannie travels with me when she can. It's for the first 5 years, Jeannie went with me every Sunday to a different church. I mean, that's a huge commitment on her part. And then after 5 years, she said, I really miss a community. And so she began to locate her own place. Jean is a fine musician. Okay, she's both pianist and vocalist. And so she chose to go to a parish where she could sing in, as she said, I want to sing in one more really good choir before my voice starts to warble. Okay? And she's done that. That's meant a lot. So anytime I talk about what's been different for me, it's affected our family. I mean, this is not. I couldn't do this. I would do it, but it'd be very different than if Jeannie and I weren't doing it together. So I just say that I'm blessed by this relationship, and out of this relationship, the other work flows. And trust me, if I don't do it right, she'll let me know.
Same question for Jeannie. Well, I honestly, I kind of thought it was going to be like he'd be the rector of a much bigger parish. And that's not the way it works at all. And after the 5 years, I realized that I couldn't relate to the, at that time, 13,000 Episcopalians that were in the diocese. That my spirituality was getting lost. I was kind of disappearing. And so I needed to have a small community. And it wasn't until I did an education for ministry training at Holy Cross Monastery in New York, which is a Benedictine Episcopal monastery, that I realized that my spirituality is Benedictine. And what that means for me is that it's important for me to go deeper in the place where I am in my spirituality, which is why traveling from place to place was so difficult for me. And so once I was able to figure that out, then I was able to stay put. And not feel guilty about it. And I appreciated all the people in the diocese that would say, oh, where's Jeannie today? And I do appreciate it. I do appreciate that, and I did. But it's because I needed to have my own spirituality and find that deeper place for myself. And because if I hadn't done that, I couldn't have been centered enough to be helpful to him, which really is my ministry. At the bottom of it, that's my ministry, is to be helpful to him so that he can be helpful to the diocese.
And that's very believable. And right now, we need to let the bishop go get ready for his next appearance.
Yeah, I was saying in closing that a former rector of Holy Communion, Eric Greenwood, used to go every year to the layman's conference at Sewanee. And he would go as a priest, which was very unusual, at the invitation of the bishops. And the reason he would go is because he played the piano. So he was the musician for the layman's conference for years. The last time he went, he was honored by the layman because they made him an honorary layman. And so I close with this. This is my theory that's emerging. You help me test it. When a person gets baptized, okay, I think they should be ordained a bishop. The really good ones should be ordained priest. The really good ones should be ordained deacons. And then ultimately, they all become lay people. that would really make the church work much better than having me. Okay, so we love you. If I might speak on our behalf, we love you. It is a privilege to be here. What a better place for us to have our last visitation. And we are still going to live in town. And you're our closest parish, so I've promised Sandy I won't bug him too much about that. But I'm going to stay under the radar for at least a year in the diocese, and I'll probably be helping out some other places over time outside the diocese. But thank you for your warm welcome, and Jane, thank you. You're always gracious and always well prepared. Thank you so much.